She thought she was chasing a salvage lead. But when mechanic and ex-rescue pilot Arden Blake stumbled across a sunken helicopter half swallowed by desert sand, something about the scene felt wrong. The paint was fresh, the cockpit was sealed, and the military crates strewn nearby weren't just outdated, they were classified. What began as a routine recovery quickly unraveled into a decades-old mystery someone had tried to bury. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if stories of hidden machines, lost missions, and second chances move you, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's episode? Let's just say, it goes deeper than sand. The desert didn't hum. It didn't whisper. It held its breath. And Arden Blake could feel it the second she stepped out of her truck boots, sinking half an inch into sun-baked sand, the heat pressing in like a dare. She adjusted her pack, shaded her eyes, and scanned the flat, sun-scorched expanse in front of her. Nothing but rock, dust, and a single, rusted marker staked into the earth. Etched into the aluminum tag, K714. Riley, her golden retriever mix, let out a small whine beside her. He didn't like it either. The coordinates had come from a junk auction site, buried in a spreadsheet of expired surplus lots and decommissioned military parts. Lot K714 was labeled simply, rotorcraft, partial frame, non-operational. No photos, no bid history, no buyers. Just a GPS pin dropped in the middle of nowhere and a warning about unstable terrain. She got it for $27 and a 2-hour drive. But standing here now, Arden realized something was off. The desert swallowed things, sure, but it didn't hide them. She stepped forward, knees stiff from the ride, and paused when the ground beneath her gave a subtle, hollow thump. She knelt and brushed away a layer of sand. Pink. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, some kind of sun-faded rust or oxidized metal. But as more grains fell away, the truth emerged. It was paint. And not just any paint. This was military-grade enamel, the kind used on experimental flight decoys. Arden's pulse quickened. "Okay," she whispered, mostly to herself. "That's not what I was expecting." She looked around. No other vehicles, no fencing, no signs of surveillance, just the wide-open quiet of southern Utah, and a sun hanging like a warning in the sky. She slid her gloves on and began digging in earnest, fingers scraping against metal and sand as more of the form took shape. Rotor blades, splayed and cracked like dead arms. Skids bent under the weight of shifting dunes. And at the center, the cockpit, intact, glossy, almost pristine under the sand. "Who buries a bird like this?" she muttered. Riley let out a low growl, tail stiff. Arden looked up fast, scanning the ridgelines. Nothing. Just heat shimmer and the distant yawn of red rock cliffs. Still, she reached for her sidearm out of habit. She moved around to the pilot's side. The canopy glass was scratched but unbroken. Inside, dust floated like ghosts. But something caught her eye, a glint. A silver chain, hanging from the cyclic stick. Dog tags. She pressed her palm to the glass. It was warm. Not just from the sun. Something about it felt recent. Preserved. She took a slow breath. This wasn't a scrap pull. This was a story someone had tried to erase, and she'd just kicked the sand off its cover page. She looked at Riley, who tilted his head in silent agreement. They weren't leaving. They were digging in. By late afternoon, the sun had dropped low enough to cast long shadows across the wreck. Arden had stripped off her overshirt, tied it around her waist, and kept at it, alternating between shovel and hands, careful not to damage the paint or the frame. Every time the wind shifted, the sand tried to undo her work. But slowly, the body revealed itself. A full-size military helicopter, sunken like a shipwreck into the desert floor. It wasn't just buried. It had been deliberately concealed. The blades were bent, but intact. The tail boom stretched out beneath the dune, and the skids, though warped, still traced the ghost of a hard landing. But the real question wasn't how it got there. It was why no one had come for it. Arden stepped back, catching her breath. The pink paint was clearer now, stretching in an uneven sheen along the fuselage. Faded lettering ran beneath the pilot's door. Echo 9. Followed by a set of call numbers that didn't match any registry she recognized. Her brow furrowed. Riley wandered around the tail, nose twitching at the disturbed ground. He whined again, more insistently this time, and pawed at something poking up through the sand. "What is it, boy?" Arden followed. Another crate. Standard issue. Labeled in stenciled black. Armament. Classified. She pried it open with a pry bar from the truck. Inside, tools and manuals sealed in wax paper, all pristine. One of the manuals still had a handwritten note inside. "Do not return. No paper trail. LTW." Arden stared at it for a long moment. This wasn't salvage. This was an erased mission. She returned to the cockpit. Sand still clung to the glass. But now she could see more clearly. The harness straps were clipped. The dash controls surprisingly untouched. Dust floated lazily over the instrument panel like someone had only recently left. Then she noticed the handle, the emergency release for the door, still sealed with a small lead wire. That made no sense. If this bird had crashed and been left for dead, why was it sealed from the outside? She crouched and traced the frame of the cockpit with her fingers. That's when she felt the indentation small, deliberate, just under the window lip. She grabbed a brush and swept. Engraved. Just a few words, nearly lost to time. "Forgive the silence. She didn't die alone." A chill crawled up Arden's spine. Despite the heat, whoever wrote that had wanted someone, anyone, to find it. Not just the machine, the memory, the truth. And that meant whatever was inside this helicopter wasn't just history. It was a message. She stood slowly, brushing the sand from her gloves. "Well," she said to Riley, her voice low. "Looks like we just opened a coffin someone forgot to bury deep enough." Riley didn't move. Just stared at the cockpit, ears flat. And for the first time in years, Arden felt that familiar weight in her gut, the one that always came before something big. This wasn't just a job. It was the beginning of something buried alive. By morning, the wind had settled, and the desert lay still, like it was waiting. Arden crouched beside the exposed body of the helicopter, eyes narrowed, brush in hand. She'd brought out a full restoration kit from the truck: fine steel wool, acetone wipes, a portable UV torch. Whatever was hidden on this craft, she was going to find it. The more paint she cleared, the more impossible it became. It wasn't military olive or desert tan. It was bright, near vibrant, a matte cherry pink that shifted slightly under sunlight, giving it an almost iridescent sheen. Arden had seen this type of coating once before. Back when she was still in the service, part of a test program evaluating optical camouflage for field decoys. Special paint that disrupted radar, confused drones, and could scatter signal heat signatures. Only 5 prototypes were ever made. None were supposed to leave the base, and definitely not crash in the middle of Utah and get buried under 50 feet of sand. She walked a slow circle around the chopper, inspecting every exposed panel, trying to make sense of it. A lot of old aircraft got repainted after decommission. But this wasn't that. The brush strokes were too clean, the surface too well preserved. Someone had painted this after it crashed, or, more likely, just before. Riley barked once, then nosed at a small cylindrical object half buried near the tail. Arden dug it out and turned it in her hands. A flare shell, its seal unbroken. She blew out a breath. "All right. So you weren't just flying. You were ready for something." Back at the cockpit, she tried the side handle again. Still jammed. She considered breaking the glass, but stopped herself. Something about the sealed frame felt sacred, like opening it wrong would ruin whatever was still preserved inside. She opted for the top escape hatch. The screws were partially eroded, but she dealt with worse. She set to work with a manual drill and a gentle touch, each bolt resisting with a soft squeal like the aircraft was protesting after so many years of silence. Finally, the last bolt released. She lifted the hatch slowly. The smell hit first, not death, not mildew, but old air, filtered and sterile, like the inside of a sealed lab container. She shined her flashlight down and froze. The cockpit was immaculate. Not stripped, not looted, preserved. The pilot's seat was upright. A flight helmet still rested in its cradle. The console had no signs of damage. And hanging from the cyclic, glinting like a whisper in the dust-filled light, the same silver dog tag she'd seen yesterday. She lowered herself in, one boot at a time, careful not to disturb the space. There was something deeply human about it. like stepping into a time capsule sealed by grief and precision. Arden took the tags in her hand. The name was still legible, Lutentis. Celia Marin, blood type, AB+. She felt her breath catch. Celia Marin wasn't just a name she recognized. It was a name from her mother's past. Arden sat in the pilot's seat longer than she realized. Hands resting on her knees, the dog tags still warm in her palm. The cockpit hummed with stillness. Not silence exactly, but something more intentional. Like whoever sealed it had wanted this place to be remembered as it was, not as wreckage, but as something unfinished. Riley's ears twitched outside the frame. The sun was rising fast, casting long fingers of light into the glass, painting the interior in amber hues. The flight controls were locked, switches set, gauges frozen mid-read, like they'd been suspended mid-flight. Arden reached for the instrument panel and gently tapped the altimeter. No movement. Then she noticed a slim leather-bound notebook wedged beside the radio stack, partially hidden behind a loose panel. It had no markings on the front, just a strip of electrical tape across the edge with a single word. Echo. She flipped it open. The handwriting was tight, technical. Not a journal, but a flight log. And this wasn't just some fill-in-the-blank checklist. These were full entries, notes scrawled with urgency, emotion bleeding through the structure. The most recent entry read, March 17th, 1998, 2145 hours. Contact lost with command. Comm interference at expected coordinates. Crew intact. Mission unresolved. No extraction. Initiating Black Echo protocol. God forgive us. Arden stared at the words. Her throat tightened. Black Echo. It was a phrase she'd heard only once, whispered in a half-lit hangar years ago when she was still in training. It was supposed to be a myth, an unofficial code used by off-book missions that went radio silent, presumed dead, and never recovered. Ghost ops, someone had called them. Not confirmed. Not denied. Just gone. She turned the page. Names were listed at the bottom. 4 of them. Lieutenant Celia Marin, Pilot Wu, Tu Kara Yoon, Co-Pilot Sergeant Delaney Rowe, Tech Spec, Ava Lake, Medic, all women. All marked with a final note. Status, MIA. Arden felt a chill crawl over her skin. This wasn't just some forgotten flight. This was a disappeared unit. Officially lost in conflict. Never recovered. Never spoken of again. And yet, here they were. Sealed in a desert tomb that hadn't rusted, hadn't rotted, hadn't given in. She looked again, at Celia Marin's name. She hadn't heard it in years, not since she was a child. Eavesdropping on one of her mother's rare late-night phone calls, hushed and trembling. She didn't have a choice, her mother had whispered. None of them did. And now her chopper was here. Arden carefully slipped the notebook into her pack and climbed out of the cockpit, heart pounding. The weight of it all, the secrecy, the names, the erasure pressed heavy on her shoulders. This wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate burial. But if someone had gone to this much trouble to hide the truth, then maybe, just maybe, it meant the story wasn't over yet. The desert sky had turned silver by the time Arden spread the logbook across the tailgate of her truck. She laid each page carefully beside the others, smoothing the creases with calloused fingers. Names, coordinates, timestamps. Half of it was redacted in pen, as if someone had tried to erase it after the fact, but didn't want to burn it completely. It wasn't just a log. It was a confession. She pulled out her own notebook and began writing, cross-referencing what she could. Unit designations, mission numbers, call signs. Echo 9 wasn't listed in any public database. And that was a problem. Even shadow units left fingerprints, budget trails, base logs, payroll stubs. But there was nothing. No trace of Echo 9. Like the crew had been written out of history. Except one thing. The blood types. Each name on the final entry had a blood type written beside it. And not just casually underlined. Marked in bold ink. As if it had been vital. Lieutenant Ludiv. Celia Marin AB plus Wu 2 Kara Yuno, Sergeant Delaney Rowe B plus Spec. Ava Lake A. Arden stared at the list. Then she dug through her rucksack until she found her old service dog tags and ran her thumb across the back. Blake, Arden, AB plus. Same as Marin. She swallowed hard. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. Either way, the coincidence didn't sit right. Riley barked a quick, alert bark, then stood facing the ridge, ears perked. Arden followed his gaze, scanning the horizon, but the landscape held steady in the haze. She moved calmly, unholstering her binoculars and sweeping the rocky outcrop. Nothing. Just sun, sand, and a vulture circling something half a mile out. Still, her gut was telling her something else. Not fear, exactly. Attention. Someone was watching. She packed up the flight log and began loading the truck, but something in her couldn't leave just yet. She turned back toward the helicopter, stepping once more into the cockpit. The smell of dust and insulation was stronger now. It wasn't rot, it was preservation, a kind of mechanical embalming. Then she saw it tucked beneath the co-pilot's seat, a second dog tag. This one etched not with a name, but a call sign. Wraith. No blood type, just one phrase on the flip side. Confirm identity, secure legacy. Her heart skipped. It wasn't military issue. It was custom, the kind given by squadmates, passed hand to hand in the field, when regulations didn't apply. The kind that meant family, forged, not by blood, but by fire. She held both tags in her hand, Marin and Wraith, and stared at the flight panel one last time. If this was a grave, it had been sealed with intent. But if it was a message, then it was meant for someone like her to find. Someone who could read between the wreckage and the silence. Someone who was willing to follow where others had disappeared. The wind picked up again by early evening, not strong, but enough to hiss softly across the sand and set the rotor blades creaking overhead. Arden sat cross-legged in the shade of the tail boom, laptop open, the scavenged flight log beside her. She'd patched a portable antenna to the chopper's original comms relay, rerouting the signal through a handheld frequency scanner. It was a long shot. She knew that. Most field radios, this old, were dead, tech relics of analog systems choked out by satellites and encryption. But this helicopter had been sealed perfectly. No moisture, no corrosion, no stripped wiring. Whoever had buried this bird hadn't done it in a hurry. They'd preserved it, hidden it like a secret worth keeping. She adjusted the dial again, scanning through static. Nothing. More static. And then, Echo 9. Do you copy? Arden froze. The voice was faint, garbled, female, clipped by distortion, but not pre-recorded live. The hairs on her arms stood up. She turned the dial again, isolating the wave. Request status update. Mission. Standby. Silence. Then the frequency dropped back into white noise. Arden sat perfectly still. It could have been a bleed-through, a ghost signal from some far-off tower, or an old distress call bouncing between repeaters like an echo refusing to die. But she knew better. This wasn't coincidence. It was timed. The moment she reconnected the comms relay, something on the other end responded. She stood and scanned the ridges again. Still no movement. But the desert suddenly felt smaller. Closer. Like it was listening back. She reached inside the cockpit, fumbled for the auxiliary breaker, and powered it. The system stuttered, dials twitching to life. Lights flickering in amber hues, then leveled into a low electric hum. The transceiver clicked. She pressed the comms mic. "This is Blake," she said. "Calling on Echo 9 frequency." "Repeat, Echo 9 frequency." "Identify." A crackle. Then, "Marin?" The voice was so quiet. Arden wasn't sure she heard it right. She pressed again. "Negative. This is not Marin. This is Blake." "Who is this?" Static. She waited. 5 seconds. 10. 30. Nothing. She let out a slow breath and leaned back in the seat, the mic still in her hand. Her pulse was hammering. There was only one possibility. Someone else was on this frequency and they thought she was Celia Marin. She leaned forward and pulled the notebook out again, flipping to the page with the final entry. At the bottom, scribbled in a different pen, was a line she hadn't seen before. Faint, almost invisible in the edge of the page. "If anyone finds this, don't respond to Wraith over open band." Eyes are still on. Arden's mouth went dry. She looked at the 2 dog tags in her hand. Marin. Wraith. One missing. One buried. And someone out there still listening for the wrong voice. This wasn't just a story of loss anymore. It was a story someone was still trying to control. The last of the sun was bleeding into the cliffs when Arden found the second crate. She hadn't noticed it before it had been wedged beneath a collapsed rotor blade, camouflaged by sand and the helicopter's own shadow. But as she stepped around to retrieve a tarp from her truck bed, her boot struck metal, and the sharp clunk made her stop cold. Different from the first. Heavier. Newer. She dropped to one knee, brushed the surface clean, and stared. The lid was smooth, matte black, and unmarked, no military stencil, no shipping number, no evidence it had ever been logged in any inventory. Just one thing. A heat-sealed tag tucked into a recessed groove. She pulled it out carefully. It was a folded plastic envelope, the kind used for sensitive briefings. Inside, a paper label typewritten. RE. Operation Widow's Fail Clearance. Eyes only Alpha level Arden blinked. She'd heard whispers of that operation years ago, back in her short time flying humanitarian logistics overseas. It had been the kind of off-the-books rumor people only spoke about in bars after too many drinks. Something about rogue extractions, compromised territory, and a mission that never came home. The name felt like myth. But now it was real. In her hands, buried in sand, she unclipped the crate latches. Inside was a bundle of documents, wrapped in a mill-grade weatherproof sleeve, and, beneath that, a photograph. Folded in half. Edges curled with age. She picked it up and slowly opened it. 4 women stood side by side in flight suits, helmets tucked under arms, boots sunk in mud. Behind them, the helicopter Echo 9, gleaming in that same impossible pink. In the center of the photo, smiling wide, was Celia Marin. And standing just off to the side, hand resting on Marin's shoulder, was a woman Arden hadn't seen in 2 decades. Her mother, young, tired-eyed, wearing civilian gear and no name patch, but unmistakably her. Arden staggered back and dropped onto the tailgate. The memory came fast, too fast. Late night. Living room glow. Her mother gripping a half-finished glass of bourbon, staring out the window whispering, "They weren't supposed to go in. Not like that. Not without backup." She hadn't known what that meant. She'd been 12. But now, under this desert sky, the sentence clicked into place like a bolt tightening. Her mother hadn't just known the crew. She'd sent them. Arden looked back at the photo, her fingers trembling. In the corner, someone had scribbled a message in marker. If this ever surfaces, it means someone didn't forget. Then, taped beneath the photo, was a small flash drive. No label, no serial, just wrapped in old duct tape. She held it up to the fading light and saw something scratched into the plastic casing. Widow's Veil divided by final debrief continent files. The crate hadn't been forgotten. It had been planted. Left behind for someone like her, to find someone connected, but far enough from the past to pull the truth forward. This wasn't about recovery anymore. It was about exposure. Arden sat in the cab of her truck, flash drive clutched in her fist like it might disappear if she let go. The sun was gone now, leaving only the low burn of twilight and the distant hum of the desert settling into silence. Riley slept at her feet, curled in tight, but her pulse was still thrumming. The moment she plugged the flash drive into her hardened field laptop, the screen flickered once, then again before a secure access prompt loaded. No password, no system ID, just a blinking cursor and a folder labeled Widow's Veil, Debrief, Cut. She clicked. Files bloomed into view. Video logs, declassified surveillance stills, partially scrubbed PDFs. Some were corrupt. Others refused to open at all. But the ones that did told a story that punched her in the chest. There had been no recorded crash for Echo 9. According to the official logs, the ones visible through military access channels and archive defense databases, Echo 9 had never existed. No tail number, no flight path, no mission, no loss. And yet, Arden was staring at video footage grainy but unmistakable of the pink-painted rotorcraft lifting off from an unnamed desert airstrip in March of 1998. Celia Marin in the cockpit, crew loaded, gear marked with red X's. The audio overlay was scratchy but clear. Echo 9 airborne. Radio dark after drop point. Secondary objective confirmed. We are not alone. Then static. Then silence. One video showed the craft landing again, a quick, sharp descent onto sand that looked familiar. But the camera angle was odd. Too low. Like it had been recorded from ground level. She paused. Replayed it. Slowed the footage. and that's when she saw it, a shadow-breaking frame in the last few seconds. Someone else was already there. Not in uniform. Not part of the crew. Watching. A civilian. And in the freeze frame, Arden recognized the figure. Not her mother. Not Celia. Herself. Or someone who looked too much like her to ignore. Same height. Same dark braid. Same boots she'd only started wearing a year ago. But the footage was from 1998. Long before she'd ever set foot in a flight hangar. Before she'd even learned what a torque wrench was. Her skin went cold. It wasn't possible. But it was there. Either the timestamp was faked, or someone was sending a message. One meant to shake her. Disorient her. Make her question what she was seeing. She looked out the windshield toward the chopper, that strange pink relic, glowing faintly under moonlight, half buried, half revealed. It had been left here on purpose, preserved, not lost. The crash hadn't happened. Or worse, it had. But it wasn't a crash at all. It was a controlled burial. A vanishing. And now, whatever Echo 9 had tried to hide beneath the sand was surfacing piece by piece, dog tag by dog tag, and it was dragging Arden Blake's name into the wreckage. Arden barely slept. The desert grew bone cold after midnight, and even wrapped in a thermal blanket with Riley curled beside her, the chill had nothing on the thoughts unspooling in her mind. By dawn, the sand had shifted again. Dunes smoothed themselves overnight like the earth was trying to cover its tracks, but the helicopter remained, stubborn and solid, a monument to something no one wanted found. She sat with a thermos of bitter coffee, flipping through the sealed documents again, hunting for anything she'd missed. That's when she saw it. Not in the flash drive files, not in the logbook. On the back of the photograph. It had been folded once, tucked tight behind that cryptic message. If this ever surfaces, it means someone didn't forget. But when she turned it over, squinting against the morning light, she saw the faint lines of ink. Coordinates. Handwritten. Not printed. 39.05. 12 degrees. North. 100. 13.899. 3 degrees. West. She plugged them into her GPS tablet. The screen pulsed once, and then zeroed in on a point 57 miles southwest deep into Bureau of Land Management territory, off any marked road, and at the edge of a restricted flight zone. No towns. No airstrips. Just nothing. A place the world had decided didn't matter. Arden's heart quickened. She'd worked long enough in recovery and salvage to know the signs. Coordinates, like that, didn't point to drop zones. They pointed to sites, things hidden, things left behind. She folded the photo again, slid it into her vest pocket, and turned to Riley. "You feel like chasing ghosts?" He thumped his tail once. By midday, she'd rigged a makeshift camo tarp over the exposed chopper, weighed it down with spare gear, and swept away any clear sign of recent excavation. Not perfect, but enough to buy time. She scrawled a note in chalk across the interior windshield. K714. Returning. Then she packed the truck, checked her water stores, reloaded her sidearm, and took one last look at Echo 9. The pink paint shimmered in the heat like a mirage. "Stay dead a little longer," she whispered. "I'll be back." The trail was rough. No roads. Just forgotten tracks choked by sagebrush and sandstone. The kind of terrain that cracked axles and killed tires. She stopped once to refuel from a spare tank, and again when a storm cloud passed, dropping a sudden curtain of wind and dust across the valley floor. But she kept driving. Past sense. Past signal. Until the land changed. The GPS pinged, then froze the screen, now centered on an elevation rise that didn't belong. A sharp ridge, with no name. And there, at the base of it, half concealed by rock and erosion, was something metallic. Just enough to catch light. Just enough to wait. Arden pulled to a stop. The coordinates hadn't lied. But what lay ahead wasn't a map marker. It was a door. The door was built into the rock like it had grown there, matte gray, flush with the canyon wall. No hinges, no visible handle. Just a faint seam outlining a rectangular panel about 7 feet tall and 5 wide. Arden approached slowly, boots crunching softly over gravel, pulse hammering against her ribs. Riley stayed back by the truck, tail low, ears perked. Even he seemed to sense it. This wasn't a bunker entrance. It wasn't military standard. It looked older. Cold War era. Maybe, but cleaner. Maintained. Still functional. She ran her fingers along the seam. Nothing gave. Then she noticed a panel, just off to the side. Half covered by sand and sun-bleached rock. She brushed it clean and found a small biometric reader dead from lack of power, but unmistakably there. Someone had been accessing this place by design, not force. And now it was dormant. She stepped back, hands on her hips. She'd come without backup. No drone, no generator, no breach equipment. If this was what the Echo 9 crew had been trying to reach, she wasn't getting in today. But she had something else. She reached into her duffel bag and pulled out the flight log and the flash drive. Inside the folder labeled debrief, cut, there had been one file she hadn't opened, not out of fear, but because it had been encrypted with a strange local authentication, one that looked like it required pairing. She took the flash drive and returned to the truck, where her laptop still sat on the passenger seat, battery low but functional. When she inserted the drive, the screen blinked once, then again, then loaded something entirely new, a schematic, not of the door, of the helicopter. Arden's brow furrowed. The file was labeled Reactivation, Echo 9 divided by core engine, subroutine, wake dog. It was a detailed rebuild plan, custom wiring, starter sequence, hydraulic bypass options, and a firmware unlock code that didn't make sense unless... She stared at the schematic again. It wasn't a file for preservation. It was a restart plan. Echo 9 wasn't meant to die in the desert. It was meant to wake something up. She closed the laptop, dusted off her jeans, and turned back toward the direction she'd come from. 57 miles across unstable terrain. But she knew what she had to do now. Resurrect the bird. She drove back in near silence, the only sound the low hum of tires against sand, and Riley's occasional breath behind her. By the time she reached the buried chopper, night was falling again. She lit the perimeter with portable floods, rolled up her sleeves, and laid out her tools. This wouldn't be a full repair. Just enough to breathe life back into the engine. Enough to get her power. Enough to open the door. She placed her hand on the engine casing. The metal was cool. "Let's see what you remember," she whispered. And then she started to turn the wrenches. By midnight, the desert had gone silent again. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums, heavy and absolute. Arden crouched beside the engine compartment, grease streaking her arms, hair tied up in a knot that had long since stopped holding. Echo 9's heart, a twin-turbine power plant, was older than most laptops, but beautifully overbuilt. And, somehow, perfectly preserved. The restoration schematic had been right. All of it. She'd bypassed the corroded ignition, rewired the starter relays, flushed what fuel remained in the lines, and replaced it with a portable canister of synthetic mix. The firmware boot chip had been hidden beneath a false panel, sealed in with military wax. She'd nearly missed it. But when she inserted the key from her own backup tools, a generic ECM bypass, the board flickered to life, and then the engine ticked. Just once. A low, reluctant cough. Then a deeper rumble. Riley raised his head from the truck bed. Arden stood still as stone. The turbines coughed again, whined slightly, then fell silent. But the smell of burning off, that sharp, hot scent of metal waking up, hung in the air. "That's right," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Come on back." She tried the sequence again. Whine. Pulse. Then a sudden, deep hum. Sustained. Lights across the panel glowed amber. The nav screen inside the cockpit flickered weakly. And out back, the tail rotor twitched just once, like a limb remembering motion. Then the ground moved. It wasn't much, just a subtle shift. Beneath her boots, like the sand had suddenly lost confidence in itself. She turned toward the rear stabilizer. The sand was sinking. Slowly, at first. A subtle collapse in a wide circle behind the tail. Then faster. Like a drain had opened beneath the dunes. Riley barked and leapt from the truck bed, circling her in panic. Arden grabbed her gear instinctively, and backed up as the earth gave a final, grinding sigh. And then the tail dropped. Just a foot, maybe two, but enough to tilt the entire helicopter backward and send half the cargo net skidding across the dirt. Beneath the chopper, a void had opened. She approached carefully, floodlight in hand, and knelt beside the shifting dune. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. A second aircraft. Not a twin of Echo 9, something older, bulkier, painted in sand camo tones, and marked with a different designation. Osiris 1-2. It had been buried directly beneath Echo 9, hidden beneath sand, sealed in darkness, and it wasn't damaged. It was parked. This hadn't been a crash site at all. It was a cache, a buried fleet, a secret hangar paved over by time and Sunday. And Echo 9? She wasn't the secret. She was the key. The desert had been a liar all along. Arden stared down into the newly exposed pit as her floodlight trembled slightly in her hand. Beneath her feet, where she had assumed the earth was solid, a structure stretched wide and deep corrugated steel bracing, old cables snaking like veins, and the unmistakable gleam of reinforced doors sunk into the rock. The tail of Osiris 1-2 had been resting atop a graded platform like it was meant to rise, like it was part of something bigger. She looked back at Echo 9. Still humming faintly, the pink helicopter stood like a sentinel, its nose angled toward the void, as if waiting for permission. This wasn't just a flight gone missing. This was a vault. She scrambled down into the exposed pit carefully, Riley hesitating at the edge before following, paws crunching against long-buried sand. Her boots landed on a steel hatch large, seamless, dusted with years of erosion but intact. A small recessed panel sat just above eye level. She brushed it clean. A biometric reader, dead. But beside it a manual override port, the same kind referenced in the Wake Dog schematic. Arden pulled her patch cable from her pack, clipped it to her portable field terminal, and connected it. The laptop screen blinked, then flashed once. Recognized Echo 9's signature, match subroutine, vault access enabled. Her breath caught. This was all deliberate. Every step. They hadn't just buried Echo 9. They'd programmed it to come back. The hatch let out a long, low hiss. Hydraulic locks disengaged one by one with the sound of sleeping giants waking up. And then, with the slow, heavy groan of old secrets finally giving way, the vault door opened. Inside was not what she expected. There were no weapons, no bunkers, no skeletal remains of a forgotten war. Instead, Arden found herself standing in the mouth of a hangar, carved directly into the rock large enough to hold several aircraft, and meticulously preserved. 3 other rotorcraft sat in formation. 2 were coated in heavy tarps. The third, a matte black model with no visible ID tags, gleamed faintly beneath a row of overhead fluorescents that flickered to life as she stepped inside. The lights worked, which meant power. This place wasn't abandoned. It was hibernating. On the far wall, a row of lockers bore crew names she recognized from the flight log. Yoon, Rowe, Lake, Marin. One locker was ajar. Inside, taped to the door's inner panel, was a photograph, the same one she'd found in the crate, but this version had something new. A note scrawled across the bottom, in thick black marker. If Echo 9 returns, she knows where to go next. And beneath it, clipped carefully in place, was a folded map. Topographic. Hand-marked. With 3 locations circled in red. One was this vault. The second was blacked out. The third was labeled Horizon Point. And in small handwriting beneath that, where she got out. The hangar felt too still, the kind of stillness that made Arden's skin prickle beneath her collar. It wasn't abandonment, it was expectation. The air tasted clean, filtered, almost clinical, like someone had been maintaining it, or like it was built to wait. She stood in front of the row of lockers for a long time. The names had weight now, more than paper, more than dog tags. Lieutenant Celia Marin, Wu Tu Kara Yoon, Sergeant Delaney Rowe, Spec, Ava Lake, Echo 9. She opened Marin's locker fully. Inside, a flight suit still hung on a steel hook, worn, sun-faded, but unmistakably real. Folded at the bottom, beneath a pair of scuffed boots, was a worn cassette recorder sealed in a plastic pouch. It had been labeled in careful block letters. Black box. Audio only Mar 17, 1998. Arden swallowed. She took it out, set it gently on a crate, and pressed play. The machine clicked, then static, then a voice crackling, tired, urgent. Marin. Echo 9 in position, confirming drop site. Terrain does not match recon. Repeat. Terrain does not match. A long silence. Then another voice row, by the tone anxious. What the hell is that? That's not ours. Faint rumbling. Wind. Command is dark. No response on secure or back channel. Ava's trying to re-establish. Then Marin again. Softer. Focused. If this is the last tape, don't believe the crash report. We weren't lost. We were cut loose. The tape whined, struggled. This place isn't in the briefings because it wasn't meant to be found. We were told to contain it. But it's not a threat. Not like they said. A pause. I left her the map. I don't know if she'll ever find it. But if she does, tell her it wasn't her fault. Static hissed again. A distant voice cut in, maybe Ava. They're here. The tape clicked off. Arden stood frozen, heart hammering. It wasn't a black box recording from the aircraft. It was deliberate. Personal. A dying message. A defiant warning. And she knew, without needing confirmation, who her was. Her mother. The guilt. The bourbon-soaked whispers. The quiet flinches when Arden asked about her early career. It wasn't just survivor's guilt. It was knowledge. She hadn't just lost friends. She'd sent them in. And someone higher up had never intended to bring them back. Arden paced the hangar slowly, flashlights sweeping across crates, half-covered consoles, and shelved tech long obsolete, but arranged like it might still be used. One workbench held a digital console with blinking red indicators. Another had a row of portable oxygen canisters, all dated within the last 5 years. This place hadn't been dormant since 1998. Someone else had been here. Recently. And if the map was right, someone had gotten out. Out of the mission. Out of the vault. Out of whatever command tried to bury them all. She turned back to Riley. He was staring at the vault exit, tail still, ears forward. Arden followed his gaze. The lights in the hangar were no longer flickering. They were steady, as if they knew she'd arrived. The map had been folded so many times, the edges were feathered and soft. Arden laid it out on the steel bench beneath the locker row, her fingers tracing the thick red circles marked in black ink. The first had been the vault, the very place she was standing. The second was illegible, scrubbed out violently, the paper torn slightly beneath the pressure. But the third, Horizon Point. It wasn't a military base. Not even a ghost town. Just a strip of unclaimed desert at the northern edge of old nuclear test, lands a dead zone on most modern maps. Which made it the perfect place to hide a survivor. Or a secret. Or both. She looked closer. Handwritten, beneath the circle. Legacy Protocol. S7 clearance only. Return code embedded. Arden frowned. That phrase had shown up before in the flash drive directory, buried under a file that had refused to open. It had been encrypted with a checksum she didn't recognize. Until now. She reopened her laptop, navigated to the final encrypted file in the drive. Its name blinked at her like a dare. Legacy, code, PKG. A password prompt pulsed on the screen. She hesitated, then typed S7. Return. The file opened. Inside, blueprints, military memorandums, redacted memos with names she half recognized from her mother's old notebooks, deputy directors, logistics officers, civilian contractors attached to shell programs, and beneath it all, a video file, labeled simply, Final Message, Celia Marin. Her hand trembled as she clicked play. Celia's face appeared, grainy, but clear. She was older than in the crew photo, with circles under her eyes, face thin, shoulders tense. She wasn't in uniform. Just a thermal shirt, hair pulled back, voice brittle from fatigue. If you're watching this, you already know what they tried to hide. She paused, a breath. Echo 9 wasn't lost. We were sent out with orders that changed the moment we crossed the ridge. Command pulled out. Communications went dark, not from failure, but from design. Behind her, dim lights flickered, a familiar glow, the same hangar. Arden stood in now. They left us here with something they couldn't control, something they wanted gone. But we didn't die. Not all of us. Another breath. Then something changed in her expression, the hardness faded. Arden, if it's you watching this, I know what your mother told you, Or what she couldn't. She didn't fail us. She fought for us. She tried to blow the whistle, and they buried her career to silence her. We were the cost. Arden's throat tightened. But this is your choice now. If the helicopter's running, if you found the vault, that means someone still cares. That means the mission didn't erase us. The screen flickered as the video neared its end. Go to Horizon Point. That's where it ends. That's where she made it out. Marin leaned in, eyes sharp. And if you find her, tell her she was right to send us. The screen went black, and Arden sat there, staring at her own reflection in the laptop screen, suddenly holding the weight of 2 generations of silence. The desert wind had picked up again by the time Arden climbed onto the tail of Echo 9. The sky above her glowed in pre-dawn blue, the stars still holding on like old memories. Her fingers gripped the edge of the rotor housing as she pulled herself up and knelt beside the main shaft. She wasn't here for repairs. She was here for the message. Celia's words echoed through her. If the helicopter's running, if you found the vault, that means someone still cares. Echo 9 wasn't just a transport. It had been made into a carrier of legacy, a vessel that would outlast every false report and every silence forged in redacted ink, and someone had left something inside it. She ran her hand along the rotor assembly, old but not broken. Clean. The engineering was precise, meticulous. And then she saw it. Tiny etchings beneath the collar ring, barely visible under a layer of grime and dust. Not serial numbers. Not manufacturer tags. Letters, carved by hand. She leaned in, brushing it clear with the edge of her sleeve. If she flies again, follow the shadow of her blades. One of us made it out. Arden pulled back. It was real. Not a metaphor. Not poetic. A mechanical breadcrumb, hidden in plain sight. Follow the shadow, she whispered. And it clicked. Rotor patterns. Echo 9's blades had been modified subtly, deliberately. One blade longer by exactly 2.3 inches. At rest, the imbalance looked like an error. In motion, it created a specific oscillation pattern, a moving signal that, if tracked, would point true north only when above a particular coordinate. A navigation system hidden in design. And Arden had rebuilt it. She scrambled back down and grabbed her field compass, aligning it with the rotor sweep. Then she turned to her map. The location labeled Horizon Point was 56 miles away northeast, not directly in line with any old trade route, but nestled in a canyon system she now recognized. The same canyon her mother had once marked in a notebook labeled Unconfirmed Extraction, LZ-17. It hadn't meant anything to Arden back then. Just another page of post-career obsession. But now, it meant someone had come back. She looked at Riley, who sat calmly beside the truck, ears twitching in the breeze. "We've got one more stop," she said softly. She spent the morning refueling, checking the rotor tension, recalibrating the nav system with the flight log overrides. Echo 9 was functional, not perfect, but ready. By noon, the engine turned over, the blades spun, and the hum in her chest matched the one rising around her. She strapped in, locked the harness, and looked once more at the vault behind her, still open, still humming with the ghosts of people who had once been forgotten. But not anymore. She gripped the controls, and with a breath that felt like it had taken years to earn, Arden lifted off. The desert blurred beneath Echo 9 as its rotors sliced through the heat-warped air, casting a shimmering shadow that twisted and elongated across the canyon floor. Arden flew low, instinctively hugging the contours of the land like the old flight maps had taught her. But this wasn't reconnaissance. This was pilgrimage. She watched the nav screen pulse steadily recalibrated to the legacy code's signal, now synced with the rotor's shadow sweep. The flight was smooth, unnaturally so, as if the helicopter remembered what it was made for, as if it had been waiting for this path, this day, this return. 50 miles passed like a breath. Then she saw it. Tucked into the cliffside just beyond a rise of pale rock, a structure, half submerged, built into the natural folds of the canyon. Not military, not civilian, something else entirely. The edges were too clean, the roof too new. Someone had been maintaining it. Her heart pounded. She brought Echo 9 down gently, skids settling into the sand with barely a bounce. As the engine whined into silence, the air grew heavy again. Riley jumped out first, circling once before trotting toward the entrance without hesitation, like he recognized something Arden didn't yet. She followed. The front door was unlocked. Reinforced. No markings. She stepped inside. The hallway was narrow, sterile, lit with soft LEDs, humming faintly from within the walls. The air smelled like filtered rain, cool, recycled, alive. At the end of the hall stood a glass panel door, and behind it, a figure, a woman, older than the photo, but unmistakable. Eyes, like hers, shoulders squared, same jawline, same stubbornness carved into her stance. Her mother. The door hissed open. Arden didn't move at first. Her mother blinked slowly, like someone waking from a dream. She wore plain clothes, boots caked in dust, hair streaked silver but tied in the same no-nonsense braid Arden had adopted years ago without realizing. "You found it," her mother whispered. "I followed the blades," Arden replied, voice cracking. Silence hung for a beat too long. Then they stepped forward, 2 lifetimes of distance shrinking into a single moment of understanding. No dramatic hug, no collapse of tears, just presence. And presence was enough. Her mother's voice was soft. "I tried to protect you from it, from all of it." Arden nodded. "But it found me anyway." Another pause. Her mother exhaled. "Celia made it to Horizon Point. She died 3 years ago, but she got out. She left you that flight log." "I know," Arden said. "She told me." Together, they stood in the quiet, surrounded by the hum of hidden power and decades of secrets neither of them could outrun. But for the first time, the weight of those secrets didn't crush. It clarified. They weren't buried anymore. Outside, Echo 9 waited dust-streaked, humming with purpose, its shadow now still against the canyon floor. This was never about escape. It was about resurrection. And as the sun arced overhead, Arden knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was where it finally began.